And thank you all for inviting me. Thank you to Neelam Publications for inviting me. I'm going to speak on Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar and some of his views. You know, he was an extraordinary figure. He was a writer, a scholar, an activist, a constitutionalist, a legal theorist, an organizer, an editor, and I'll pick up a few themes in his, particularly his thought, which have appealed to me and attracted me over the decades. But since Paranjit mentioned Palwankar Balu, and since this is Dalit History Month, let me say a little bit about Palwankar Balu before I come to Dr. Ambedkar. And of course, I'd be delighted if Ranjit was to make the film. But even if he was not to make the film, Balu is someone who deserves to be known well beyond the world of, really the current state of knowledge about particularly about our so-called favorite sport, cricket. Now, it is the conventional wisdom is that the first great Indian cricketer was a prince called Ranjit Singh Ji, who was from the royal family of Navanagar and made his name playing for England. So that's the conventional wisdom. The first great Indian cricketer was a prince. My book, Corner of Foreign Field, upended that and showed that the first great Indian cricketer was actually a Dalit called Palwankar Balu. And his story had been rendered invisible for many reasons. One is that he largely played before Test cricket. Now, before Test cricket started in India in the 1930s, the major cricketing tournament in India was the Bombay Quadrangular. It was played on religious lines between the Europeans, the Parsis, the Hindus and the Muslims. And it attracted large crowds, lots of press coverage. It was the IPL of its day. And Balu was a star in the Bombay Quadrangular. He was a great spin bowler. In 1911, the first All India team toured England. And Balu got 150 wickets. Balu's brother Shivaram was also on that team. They were both born into the Dalit community, and my book talks of how the struggles they had to overcome to start playing for the Hindus. You know, they could play for the Hindus, but in the tea interval, which is a sacred ritual in cricket, they had to be served in matkas outside the pavilion. Nonetheless, they were chosen. In 1911, Balu got 150 wickets. He was offered county contracts. So we're talking 110 years before Virat Kohli and so on, right? And when they came back, when the ship came back from England, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was not then doctor, he was merely a student in Bombay University, read out the Man Patra on behalf of the Depressed Classes Association of Bombay, congratulating Balu. And according to Eleanor Elliott, who is the greatest historian, first great historian of, Western historian of Dalits, and who wrote the first major book on Ambedkar in English, Dr. Ambedkar and the Mahar Movement. According to Eleanor Elliott, this was Baba Sahib Ambedkar's first public appearance to celebrate the achievements of Balu. Now, despite this, he was never made captain. And my interest in Balu, since I'm speaking at a meeting hosted by a publishing house, and there are scholars in this audience who have delved into old documents, old newspapers, my interest in Balu really was sparked by a newspaper report I read in the Bombay Chronicle of 1913. Now the quadrangular was about to start, the IPL is about to start, and all the papers are saying who will play for CSK, who will be the captain, will Kohli stay with RCB or will he move? So like that, all the press commentary about the quadrangular had started. The Hindus appointed their captain. They appointed the captain, he was a man called M.D. Pai. And his caste association, the Gaud Saraswats of Bombay, held a felicitation. Our man has become captain. So Pai gave this talk, went to the function, and the newspaper report said that Pai thanked his association for the felicitation. Being captain was the greatest honor. But then he added, however, that honor should have gone to my teammate Palwankar Balu because he's a senior and better player. Now, you will never hear a captain of a team saying somebody else should be captain. Rohit Sharma is not giving an interview saying, make Jasprit Bumrah the captain. That is not happening. So I started reading between the lines and I realized Pai is a Brahmin. His teammate Balu is a Dalit. That's the only reason he is not the captain. Now, this is 1913. In 1919, Pai was injured. So he should have 1920. So even then they did not make Balu captain. And when they did not, Balu's brother Shivaram, who was an even better cricketer than Balu, and his youngest brother Vittal went on a strike, saying our brother has been denied the honor of captain only because of his caste. And some of the pro-Dalit social workers of Bombay started a fund to support Vittal and Shivaram. Finally, in 1923, Vittal became captain. And it's an extraordinary story. And as Ranjit mentioned, I should say that Tamil Kunja Kunja Tariyo. So I understood about 20% of what Ranjit said in Tamil. Okay. And it is true. So in 1937, the elections are held under the Government of India Act, and Sardar Patel, who was a very, as you know, a very shrewd and cunning organizer, wanted Ambedkar to lose. So he put up Balu against Ambedkar. That is, he put up Ambedkar's past hero and the first great public figure from the Dalit community, Ambedkar. And Balu, I saw an election speech in the newspaper where Balu says, I am a loyal congressman and I have been asked to stand against Dr. Ambedkar. But I have the highest regard for Dr. Ambedkar. He is an educated barrister of our community. But I still have to stand against him. So it's a very moving story. And in Dalit History Month, I thought, since I was not going to speak about Balu, I'm only going to speak about Ambedkar. I'm going to come to Ambedkar in a minute. But since Paranjit gave me the clue, I thought I should tell you a little bit about this extraordinary figure. The first great Indian cricketer was not a prince. He was a Dalit. And if I may add a cricketing line, so I'm sure some of you here are cricket fans. And the greatest prejudice in cricket is against bowlers. Batsmen are the Brahmins and bowlers are the Dalits. And that is the reason Balu was not made captain, among other things. Luckily his brother Vittal started batting and then became captain. Okay. So, with this rather long and impromptu prelude, let me come to the topic of my talk, which my friend Vasuki and I decided on, which is appreciating Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. And I'm going to begin with a meeting I attended 32 years ago. 1994 was the 125th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. And there was a meeting organized in Manipal, hosted by the great Kannada writer and public intellectual U.R. Ananthamurthy. And on the dais was a portrait of Gandhiji in his loincloth and his staff. And there were many speakers, many famous intellectuals. Ashish Nandi was there, Claude Alvarez. Many intellectuals spoke in English. And on the last day, the Kannada writer Devanur Mahadeva, who is today much better known than he was then, who is in many ways the conscience of my state, the moral conscience of my state, Karnataka, and of course of a Dalit background himself, spoke. He spoke in Kannada, and I think it was Ananthamurthy who translated. So he started, and I don't know, Mahadeva is a great writer, but unlike me and unlike Ranjit, he's a very shy, diffident speaker. He's not an orator. He speaks very quietly and softly. And of course he was speaking Kannada, and most of the attendees did not know Kannada. Ananthamurthy was translating. And as I recall, this is what he said. He pointed to the portrait of Gandhiji, which was on the dais, which for 3 days it had been there and everyone was speaking. And he said, look at Gandhiji. Look at his dress. What do we say? What great sacrifice. The Kannada word, which is also the Sanskrit word, and Tamil will probably have a non-Sanskrit equivalent, which is good for Tamil. Tyaga. He said, what will we say? Gandhiji's Tyaga, Gandhiji's sacrifice. Here he is, the son of a diwan, born in an upper caste home, educated in London, prosperous legal practice. He gives it up to live with the people. He wears a loincloth. This is Tyaga. Then he read out a poem. A poem written by a Dalit friend of his, which celebrated Dr. Ambedkar in a suit. So he didn't, like Dr. Ambedkar is wearing a suit here, but he talked about the statue of Dr. Ambedkar, and the young Dalit is writing a poem celebrating Ambedkar in a suit. He says, what if Dr. Ambedkar, there's a portrait of Dr. Ambedkar, like Gandhiji in a loincloth. What will we say? You know, after he's a Dalit, what else will he wear? He's a Harijan, what else will he wear? Right. So why do we celebrate him in a suit? Because he is not supposed to wear a suit. According to history and tradition and culture and politics, he is never supposed to attain to that level where he can wear a suit, let alone hold the copy of the Constitution whose drafting he had overseen. Now, it was a profoundly moving image, the way he captured it. And he did not oppose Gandhi to Ambedkar. He did not say Gandhi is bad, Ambedkar is great. He just showed why different leaders are represented in different ways. Why we have Gandhiji in a loincloth and why we have Dr. Ambedkar in a suit. And at that stage, and this is of course absolutely true, that among the great, famous, internationally known leaders and thinkers of the freedom struggle, Ambedkar was unique in many ways because of his quality, distinction and so on, but also because of his social background. Gandhi was the son of a diwan, of a princely state. Nehru was the son of a very wealthy lawyer, very wealthy and successful Brahmin lawyer. Patel was from an upper peasant family. Rabindranath Tagore came from one of the most wealthy business homes. And of that generation, it is Ambedkar who had to struggle, who had to make his way up. And that's why he was presented in a suit. Now, at this stage, when Devanur Mahadeva gave this talk in 1994, I was in my mid-30s. I had started my career as an environmental historian. I had grown up in a home in which Gandhiji and Nehru were admired. And Ambedkar was just a name to me. You know, I didn't really know very much about him. And it was around that time, shortly after Mahadeva's talk, that I started reading Ambedkar. And I can't remember exactly when, but about 30 years ago, probably in the year 1995, I read in quick succession two books, one by Dr. Ambedkar and one about Dr. Ambedkar. And I'll say something about both books. The first book will be well known to many of you. The second book, which is by Dr. Ambedkar, The Annihilation of Caste. The second book will not be so well known to you. So let me say a little bit about both of them, both those books, and what they tell us about Ambedkar and his place in the history of our country, in the unfinished history of our country. Now, Annihilation of Caste, all of you here know the circumstances of its composition, how it was supposed to be a lecture to a Hindu reformist group in Punjab, and when they read the text, the group withdrew the invitation and then he printed it on his own. And I'm not sure it was written in English. Ambedkar, of course, wrote in Marathi and in English. This book was written in English to reach a non-Marathi audience. And many of you here have read Annihilation of Caste. I don't know in which edition, but I first read it in an edition published by a Delhi publisher, Arnold Heinemann, with an introduction by Mulk Raj Anand, which was a very interesting introduction. Short, just 10 pages, not 100 pages, just 10 pages. You know, Dr. Ambedkar's text is only about 50 pages in print. The introduction was the appropriate length, just 10 pages. And Mulk Raj Anand, for those of you who may not know, was an English language novelist who published the first novel in the West on caste discrimination. And it's called Untouchable. He published two novels, 35 and 36. One is called Untouchable, one is called Coolie. And they are the first novels by Indian writers published in the West about caste and class discrimination. And I urge you to read Untouchable. It is still in print. It was republished by Penguin Classics some years ago with an introduction by me. And Ambedkar tract had been out of print for a long time. And here it was reintroduced by Mulkaj Anand. And it made, like anyone who reads Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste is blown away by it. Because it is so clear, so direct, so precise, so persuasive. It is the work of a scholar. It is the work of someone who has studied sociology, law, economics, philosophy. But it is not written for fellow scholars. There is no jargon. It's a book by a scholar written for citizens. And that's what I like about it. Because I think scholars have an obligation to be democratic in their prose. Not to use jargon, not to only use fancy words. And Annihilation of Caste is a model of how to use scholarship to communicate to a larger audience. And of course, the central argument, one of the central arguments of the book, which is entirely relevant today, is that it is intercaste that will lead to the intercaste marriage that will lead to the annihilation of caste. Marriage of people of different jatis and ideally of different varnas. Only that would lead to the annihilation of caste. And of course, that is a message that is still so unfortunately relevant when, what is it now, 70 years after Ambedkar's death, probably 90 or 95% of Indian marriages are still within the same caste group. But there's some other remarks there. I'll just quote you two short statements from Annihilation of Caste, which even today, 30 years after I first read that book, I've read the book many times, I've taught it in class, I've written about it. There's a very interesting philosophical commentary on Annihilation of Caste by a Hyderabad professor, Professor Syed Ahmad Saeed, which has just been reprinted. So it's a book I return to many times. It's one of those books you must return to many times. And but just two statements I'll read out from there. One, you must have the courage to tell the Hindus, this is Ambedkar writing, he's addressing these Hindu social reformers who had invited him in Punjab. You must have the courage to tell the Hindus that what is wrong with them is their religion. The religion which produced in them this notion of the sacredness of caste. The enemy reformers must grapple with is not the people who observe caste, but the Shastras who teach them this religion of caste. Now, this is one statement which is, I think, that the problem is intrinsic to the religion. You can't say it's an aberration. You know, today the RSS will tell you, I mean, the RSS, you know, life has become harder and harder for a historian like me. When you deal with WhatsApp history. So according to some ideologues, it was the Muslims who brought caste into India. Right. Now, so in a context like this, you know what Ambedkar is saying, that it's central, it's essential, you have to discard the Shastras. You can't say this is a misinterpretation of the Shastras, it's the core. And the other statement, which is I think very important to understand where Ambedkar is in 1936, when the British are ruling India. And Ambedkar, as you know, always refused to join the main nationalist opposition to the British, represented by the Congress Party. Ambedkar says, I quote, political tyranny is nothing compared to social tyranny. Political tyranny is nothing compared to social tyranny, and a reformer who defies society is more courageous than a politician who defies government. A reformer who defies society is more courageous than a reformer who than a politician who defies government. Now, as I said, I have read Annihilation of Caste several times since. It's a book that's had a profound impact on my understanding of my country, and that appreciation of Ambedkar, my talk is called Appreciating Baba Saheb Ambedkar, that appreciation of Annihilation of Caste is surely shared by many people in this room. So let me now move to a second book, which I read around the same time, and which I have reread many times, which will be much less familiar to this audience. And that is a book by the late D.R. Nagaraj, called The Flaming Feet. Now, D.R. Nagaraj was a brilliant Kannada writer from a backward caste background, very close to the Dalit movement. For those of you who will know these names, he was an intimate and very close friend of both Devanur Mahadeva and Siddhalingaya. And he wrote mostly in Kannada, but towards the end of his life, he died in 1998 when he was only 44. And people who knew Nagaraj like me miss him still because of the brilliance of his intellect and the passion of his writing. And shortly before he died, he wrote his first short book in Kannada, which is called, in English, I beg your pardon, it's called The Flaming Feet. And it's an account of Dalit politics and thinking, mostly in Karnataka. But the first chapter is about Gandhi and Ambedkar. And that first chapter that Nagaraj wrote, which I read shortly after Annihilation of Caste, had an almost equally great impact on me. Now that chapter is called Self-Purification versus Self-Respect. Self-purification versus self-respect. It's contrasting the paths taken by Gandhi and Ambedkar. Gandhi's path is self-purification, that the upper castes must purify themselves of the practice of untouchability. And in criticizing untouchability, Gandhi uses some very strong language, which sometimes is not appreciated enough. He says, he's writing in the 1920s after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, he's saying the Hindus who practice untouchability are the general dyers of Hinduism. That's the language he uses. So that's self-purification. It's trying to persuade upper caste Hindus that untouchability is a sin. And the word sin is used several times by Gandhi in describing untouchability. So the self-purification of Gandhi sought to make upper castes abandon their arrogance and contempt for those whom the mere accident of birth had consigned to the bottom of the caste hierarchy. On the other hand, Ambedkar adopted the path of self-respect, which was aimed at his fellow Dalits, urging them to liberate themselves. In his famous phrase, educate, organize, agitate. Self-purification versus self-respect. Now, this is a very interesting and innovative way of putting it. Or we might say, and this is what one of Nagaraj's students has recently, Professor Mahinda Kumar of Mysore University has recently put it. He says, Gandhi was trying to rid upper caste, Savarnas, of their superiority complex. Ambedkar was working and struggling to rid Dalits of their inferiority complex. And what is novel about Nagaraj, what is not just novel, what is original, what is compelling, and what is so relevant to us about Nagaraj is he's saying India today needs both those paths. And he says, back in 1993, he says, from the point of view of the present, there is a compelling necessity to achieve a synthesis of the legacies of Ambedkar and Gandhi. In other words, to build a more caring and just society, one needs to both awake the upper caste consciousness and consolidate the efforts for Dalit self-respect and self-organization and self-liberation. So, he says, Nagaraj writes in 1993, 30 years ago he writes, Gandhi and Ambedkar can and must be made complementary to one another. Now, I'm going to return to this question towards the end of my talk, on can Gandhi and Ambedkar be made complementary to one another? Must they be made? If so, what are the ways in which we can start rethinking our, shall we say, our preconceptions? The ways in which followers of Gandhi must rethink their preconceptions and followers of Ambedkar must rethink their preconceptions. I'll come back to that. But I now want to move beyond the whole issue of caste discrimination to questions of democracy and its functioning. And I want to now talk about Ambedkar. I've talked about him so far as the emancipator of the Dalits, of the oppressed. I now want to talk about Ambedkar as a visionary and original democratic thinker, more broadly speaking. And earlier this year, you will be observed on 30th January this year, the 75th anniversary of the passing of the Indian Constitution. And of course, every politician, they were falling over each other to praise Ambedkar. You know, they were outdoing one another, you know, whether it is the Congress or the BJP or the regional parties or whatever. And when you see what, you know, these people are, what our ruling party and even our opposition politicians, our major politicians in Delhi and the states, you wonder how sincere they are. Is it just opportunism? Is it, and of course it is largely opportunism. It's not clear how much of Ambedkar they've read, understood, digested. So I wanted to go back to what Ambedkar himself said to the Constituent Assembly during the time the Constitution was being drafted and passed. And I'm going to read out to you some remarks of his. This is 1948 and 1949 respectively. The two speeches, two extraordinary speeches he made, which are reproduced in my book, Makers of Modern India, but you'll also get them online. One was made in November 1948, 4th November 1948, when he was presenting the draft constitution to the members of the assembly. And the other was made a year later, in November 1949, when the constitution had been adopted and the assembly was winding down its proceedings. So I'm going to read to you excerpts from these two speeches. Please, when you have the time, go and read the entire speeches, because I'm only reading you selected excerpts that you know, are relevant to my talk today. But do read the entire, but not very long, and they're really brilliantly argued and crafted. So in this first of the two speeches, when presenting the draft constitution, which Ambedkar made to the assembly on 4th November 1948, he stressed the importance of what he called constitutional morality. He used the term constitutional morality. The term was not originally his. It had been used by the 19th century English constitutional theorist George Grote. But the definition of Ambedkar's is very, very important. He says, constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. We adopted a constitution. But do we get the sense? Constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated. We must realize that our people have yet to learn it. Democracy in India is only a top dressing on Indian soil, which is essentially undemocratic. Democracy in India is a top dressing on Indian soil, which is essentially undemocratic. And then Ambedkar goes on. This is a really striking remark whose implications I'm going to draw out for you. Ambedkar says, in this speech of November 1948, he says, it is perfectly possible to pervert the constitution without changing its form. It is perfectly possible to pervert the constitution without changing its forms, and it can be perverted by changing the form of the administration and make it inconsistent and opposed to the spirit of the constitution. Now, this is what Indira Gandhi did in the 1970s. Now, I'm old enough. I was telling a young friend of Neelam Bala, who has been with me for the last year, that I was a student in the emergency. You know, I was an adult. I came of adulthood in the emergencies. Many of you here, including Ranjit, are too young to remember it. And what Indira Gandhi did, even before she promulgated the emergency was a violation of the Constitution. But even before that, she had perverted the spirit of the Constitution by coining the phrases committed bureaucracy, committed judiciary. You know, a civil servant, an IAS officer, an IPS officer in Chennai takes an oath to the Constitution of India, not to the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. Right. And it was Indira Gandhi, and that was the practice in the 50s and 60s, you know. By the way, Jawaharlal Nehru was very different from Indira Gandhi. He never corrupted the administration. He never asked for loyalty from IAS or IPS officers and judges. Indira Gandhi said, she started this idea. This idea was then taken even further by state chief ministers and much further by the current regime. So under the current regime, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the IAS officer, the IPS officer, the Vice Chancellor, the judge, even the Chief of the Army Staff has to be committed to the party and in power and the Prime Minister in power. And Ambedkar wrote this. He said, you may appear to adhere to the form of the Constitution, but you are perverting of the spirit by making the administration an extension of yourself. And what Indira Gandhi started, Narendra Modi has continued and deepened much further. And as some of you know, I write very long books, 800, 900 page books. And I'm not a copywriter who coins clever phrases. But there is one clever phrase I coined, which I'm proud of, where I described Narendra Modi as Indira Gandhi on steroids. And I think that's a reflection of actually what Ambedkar had warned, that you don't have an emergency, you praise Ambedkar, you praise the Constitution, but you have perverted the spirit. So that is the first speech that Ambedkar made, which I wanted to draw your attention to. The second speech was made a year later, and it was the concluding speech to the Constituent Assembly. And there were two warnings he issued there. One warning is well known, but it bears repeating. This first warning had to do with the Indian tendency towards hero worship. Ambedkar, I quote, Ambedkar asked his compatriots to observe the caution which John Stuart Mill, who was the great British liberal theorist, to observe the caution which John Stuart Mill has given to all who are invested in the maintenance of democracy, namely, not to lay their liberties at the feet of even a great man or great woman, or to trust him with powers which enable him to subvert the institutions. And then Ambedkar continued, and some of these phrases will be familiar to some of you, but maybe you haven't thought deeply enough about the implications. So Ambedkar says, this caution, not to lay your liberties at the feet of a great man, is even more necessary in the case of India than in the case of any other country. Bhakti, or what may be called the path of devotion or hero worship, plays a part in Indian politics unequaled in magnitude by the part it plays in the politics of any other country in the world. Bhakti in religion may be a road to the salvation of the soul, but in politics, bhakti or hero worship is a sure road to degradation and to eventual dictatorship. Now, this is said in 1949, and they're absolutely prescient about the cult of Indira Gandhi in the 1970s and the cult of Narendra Modi today. That in the 1970s, Indians laid their liberties at the feet of Indira Gandhi because she was the great liberator, she had freed Bangladesh, she had abolished the princely purses. And today, so many Indians are doing the same for Narendra Modi. And these personality cults have degraded Indian democracy. And it's important to recognize, I have so far mentioned just Modi and Indira Gandhi. It's important to recognize today that these personality cults are pervasive. They're pervasive in the state in which I'm speaking about your Chief Minister, M.K. Stalin. They're pervasive in Kerala, where some of the critics of the Chief Minister called Vijayan Modi in a mundu. They're there in West Bengal. They were there with the worship of the Gandhi family in the Congress. So it's a very it's a very widespread thing. And let's not be deluded into thinking only the other party does. Once you withdraw your critical faculties, once you make an individual into a demigod, I think whatever party you are from, obviously Narendra Modi controls the whole country. He has the state apparatus, he has the Godi media, he has the large capitalists on his side. So the damage his personality cult does is far greater than the personality cult of Stalin or Vijayan or Mamata Banerjee or Rahul Gandhi. But a true Democrat, and I believe Ambedkar would have recognized that all personality cults are bad, and including the personality cults outside politics. I mentioned cricket, the way in which our cricketers are made into demigods, our film stars. So I think that is one of Ambedkar's warnings about how Indians are excessively prone to hero worship. Bhakti in religion is a route to salvation. Bhakti in politics could be a route to dictatorship. So that's at how widespread, how we have disregarded his warning in such a widespread way, I think is somewhere, which is, I think, very important for everyone to consider. Both followers and heroes. It's true also about writers like me, People may say he's a great writer. You may have all kinds of sycophants writing to you. It's true about filmmakers like my friend Ranjit. You do wonderful films and you start thinking, so I think this is something which Ambedkar recognized so perceptively. He was really a truly visionary democratic thinker. I'm now going to come to his second warning, and then with a few concluding remarks, I'll end my talk. This second warning is also in his last speech of November 1949, and it's not a very important distinction he makes between political democracy and social democracy. Political democracy is not necessary, has to be merged, blended, converted into social democracy. And this is what Ambedkar says. On the 26th of January 1950, that is when the Constitution will be adopted, on the 26th of January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, or what today we will say, one person, one vote. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one person, one vote, says Ambedkar, and one vote, one value. The vote of a man is equivalent to a woman, of a Dalit to a Brahmin, of an Adivasi to a Muslim, and so on, of a worker to a billionaire. So in politics, we are recognizing the principle of one person, one vote. But in our social and economic life, by reason of our social and economic structure, we will continue to deny the principle of one person, one value. How long, says Ambedkar, shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long will we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? Now, it is 75 years since Ambedkar uttered these warnings. And when he uttered them, when Ambedkar made this very crucial and important distinction between politics, political democracy and social democracy and economic democracy. On one hand, you have one person, one vote, but in society and economics, you don't have one person, one value. People are treated, graded differently, assessed differently. In making this distinction between equality in politics, or equality in the ballot box, and equality in everyday life, Ambedkar largely had the rights of Dalits and women in mind. The Constitution had abolished caste and gender distinctions. But he knew from his studies as a sociologist and his work as an activist, he knew that although the Constitution had legally, with a stroke of the pen, abolished caste and gender distinctions, in everyday life it might persist. And that's why he was drawing attention to removing that in everyday life. However, apart from Dalits and women, if you look at it, India today, if you look at India in 2025, 75 years after the Constitution was adopted, and speaking now as a scholar myself, as a sociologist and historian, I would say that broadly speaking, there are 4 groups in India that are discriminated against. 4 social groups that enjoy the vote, but are not usually, and sometimes not even often, treated as equal citizens. And these 4 groups are Dalits, women, Muslims, and Adivasis. And I think this is where I want to bring back Ambedkar and Gandhi. Ambedkar was deeply, deeply concerned about Dalits and women, but less so about Muslims and Adivasis, which is absolutely fine. We should not criticize him for it. You know, each of us has our own orientation, our own compulsions. But if you look particularly at Muslims and Adivasis, like Dalits and women, they have the vote, yet they are not treated as equal citizens. The dispossession and discrimination that Adivasis have experienced is arguably even greater than that of the Dalits. And the harassment, stigmatization, and outright persecution of Indian Muslims is more intense now than at any time since 1950. The democratic principle of one person, one vote is denied to Dalits, to women, to Adivasis, but in my view, most of all to Muslims. And that is why we need Gandhi and Ambedkar both. It was Ambedkar who, more than any other male politician of his time, with the possible exception of Periyar, Ambedkar was the male politician of his time who recognized the importance of gender equality. And it was Gandhi who, more than any other male politician of his time, stressed the rights of minorities and gave his life so that India would not become a Hindu Pakistan. Now, I am partly speaking here as a scholar, partly as a citizen, and partly because of my own personal life journey. In my life, Gandhi and Ambedkar have been the two guiding lights. They have been the people whose writings I've turned to again and again, whom I have written about, whom I have sought to understand, to probe too deeply, to appreciate and occasionally even to criticize them. You know, if I find that something that Gandhi has said or Ambedkar has said is not congenial to our life in 2025. But broadly, I see them. I see Ambedkar and Gandhi as the two great visionaries and moral figures of our time, of our age, of our modern age. And I was therefore deeply gratified when participating in the anti-CAA protest of 2019, and I was gratified to see young students upholding portraits of Gandhi and Ambedkar, that they were refusing to choose between Ambedkar and Gandhi. And I think that is some of the spirit we need to revive and renew now, because those who want to oppose, those who, for whatever reasons, see Gandhi, Ambedkar and Gandhi as rivals and adversaries, are, in my view, unwittingly, unconsciously, inadvertently playing into the hands of the Hindu right. Because if we want to resist the rise of, if we want the two major dangers in India today, to democracy, are authoritarianism and majoritarianism. Authoritarianism, the concentration of power, control, authority in one man, Narendra Modi, his party, the capture of the bureaucracy, the judiciary, the police, and so on, authoritarianism and majoritarianism, the idea that minorities cannot be treated as equal citizens. And if we want to resist the rise of authoritarianism and majoritarianism, if we want to build an India where Dalits and Muslims and Adivasis and women are treated as fully equal citizens, then we need both Gandhi and Ambedkar. Thank you. Can you come in front and ask? Can you just come in front and ask? I can see you there. Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
My name is Tyagachamla. I'm a journalist here. I'm a very fond reader of your Gandhi, India before Gandhi and Gandhi before India. So it will be appropriate to put this question to you. Historian Ramachandra Guha thought of writing the history of India in the perspective of Gandhi in two books. Why didn't he think writing the same history as Ambedkar, India before Ambedkar, and the same one?
That's a fair enough question. But Ambedkar, I'd say this, that, each of us is a product of our personal biography. And for many reasons, including my involvement in the environmental movement in which Gandhians are very active, I wrote on Gandhi. There are also family reasons which I was describing to some of your colleagues here. But you see, Ambedkar is a central figure in India after Gandhi. His role in the constitution. Even in my book, Makers of Modern India, there are two chapters on Gandhi and two chapters on Ambedkar. Everyone else, Periyar has one chapter, Nehru. Right. So, And then I wrote these two volumes on Gandhi. And of course, Ambedkar figures centrally in the second volume. And if you have read that second volume, which is called Gandhi, the Years That Changed the World, you will see that I treat both of them with profound respect and interest and historical accuracy. And I also show how Gandhi's radicalization of the caste question was largely, not wholly, due to Ambedkar. Now, you asked me, when I published my second volume, I was, several people asked me, why don't you write on Ambedkar? Including people like you who have come up here. Someone on a flight was carrying my book and said, people I admire, and I have this answer. There are three answers why I cannot write 2 volumes on Ambedkar. One is I'm almost 70. It took me 25 years to get to grips with Gandhi. I am not an Instagram or WhatsApp historian. So I need time. I wish I could. The second reason is, that there are now some very good books on Ambedkar that are there. The third reason is, I don't know Marathi. But I continue to be interested, absorbed, fascinated, intrigued by Ambedkar. And I will read him, appreciate him for the rest of my life. Now that answer may not satisfy you, but that is what it is. All of us have to make choices. I took the choice to spend 20 years on Gandhi. I don't have 20 years left to write on Ambedkar, but I will find ways of, he's been a part of my earlier writings, and I really appreciate the fact now that there are lots of very interesting books on Ambedkar. So Ashok Gopal and Anand Telgumde's biographies, thematic studies. I mentioned this introduction by Professor Syed on Annihilation of Caste. If you look at Scott Stroud's work on Dewey and Ambedkar. So, if I was 50 and not 70, I would take your advice.
One follow-up question with that.
Please, yeah.
Do you think that the title which I proposed is very much in need for this current society, that it must be written Ambedkar, India after Ambedkar?
Look, yeah, so I gave this talk, which is, the last portion of the talk was basically not India after Ambedkar. What would Ambedkar have made of India today? Right, that's what I tried to do in my talk. Yeah. So, of course, India after Ambedkar, I think more than India after Ambedkar, what would Ambedkar and Gandhi, if Ambedkar and Gandhi had been around today, they may have had the same sentiments about what India is today. That's what I tried to do.
Good morning. I'm Gopinath. You are very particular about Muslims, Adivasis, Dalits, and women, right? The caste or a race, as the name goes, in Muslims, Adivasis, and Dalits. But women, where do they stand? And as you said, can you just elaborate about the role of women in the near future, and what do you expect them to do along with these 3 people?
No, so, it would require a full lecture and by people more. But essentially, as I said, historically, I'd say this, that, I mentioned the Hindu right today, and they claim that our society was perfect. So the axis of caste and the axis of gender were fundamental axes of discrimination. And they are there in our social practice and in our scriptures. And it's true, and here it is true, especially discrimination against women, is true among both our dominant religions, Hindus and Muslims. And part of Ambedkar's greatness was that he did not have to look at religion and say, actually, no, like today, you will find reformers saying, no, the Vedas are actually not really anti-caste. So I think that's where, it would have to mean, again, educate, agitate, organize would have to be a principle for the feminist movement as well. It is, one of the most shocking statistics in India today is that the female participation rate in the labor force is steadily declining, whereas in our surrounding countries such as Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, it is going up. And women's equality will come when women have the right to choose everything. When they have a baby, where they will work or they're educated. So it's an ongoing struggle. So I think, and Ambedkar, interestingly, I mentioned Periyar and Ambedkar. Nehru, to his credit, also recognized that it's very, very important to, So I just say this, that these are things that we have to continuously be aware of. What are the imperfections and failures and fault lines in our society? Not become complacent, not become seduced by all this nonsensical talk about Vishwaguru. We have to look within. As Ambedkar says, someone who criticizes the defects in his own society may be more courageous than that person who merely criticizes the politicians. So that's where it comes in. And I think
okay, thank you so much. Now I request Director Par Ranjit sir to do the honor of presenting memento to our chief guest.